Okay, next subject is making wheat viable in today's market. And to visit on this subject is Jason Vollmer. Jason is a native of North Dakota. He hails from Animals. And he is an NDSU grad. He was in animal science, or he has a training in animal science, but in 1997 he saw the light and went to agronomy. And he serves as a sales agronomist with Allied Agronomy. And I know he's a boots on the ground guy, and so I really appreciate the experiences that he has behind him in discussing this topic about, well, making wheat exciting again.
Thank you, Greg. So first off, there's a misprint on your deal. I'm not a Winfield agronomist. They wouldn't claim me. We were trying to get the Winfield agronomist up here to talk about it. His name's Jason Hansen, but he had a car accident, so Tim asked me if I would improvise. So it won't be as good, but we'll try and navigate through this. Well, when we start looking at the idea of using wheat and making it viable, using it in today's world, corn seems to be the commonplace, and wheat's starting to get pushed off as almost a wicked stepchild. They put it on, usually it's not put on the most productive ground, and you expect the high yields to come out of it. And we'll go through some and see what a little bit of market trends are, and I'll try and go through a lot of the slides that we get as agronomists from different meetings and see where we come up with. So this is the fundamentals from FC Stone. It shows world wheat. If you can see the world wheat production, world wheat total use is steadily increasing. There's no doubt, and we're living hand to mouth. Here's the U.S. wheat supply and demand. If you take a good look down at the price at the bottom and look at our total use, we're in our imports. At the end of October 14-15, this is fiscal year, the government's fiscal year. So if you look where look at our carryout, we really aren't changing anything in the wheat market whatsoever. We're just kind of flatlined off. We produce what we produce, we export, and we import to offset it. So the whole world is living without current storage. If you remember in the 80s, the government storage was commonplace, but really right now the only government in the world that has much storage is China. There's our total use versus production. If you see that, if you look back since '85, 5 times we've produced what we've needed in this country. And there's our steady decline of the harvested acre in the U.S. Our yield has gone up, but if you look back in 30 years, we've gone from a low 30 U.S. average to a low 40s. If you would look back at corn, you would see that corn has way outproduced its advancement in wheat. And the question is why? So if you look at our across, it's pretty much, if you draw a trend line through there, it would pretty much be flat on what we produce nationally. So why should we include wheat in the rotation? You hear a lot about weed resistance management, and that is a big deal. Rotation, rotation, rotation. Works really good. Spread your workload and your labor over more acres, your equipment, financial risk. But the thing that you need to really pay attention to is the second line from the bottom. The private sector is getting heavily into wheat breeding and advancement. And the reason is the first slide. Worldwide, wheat acres, we have a growing demand for wheat, and there's only so many acres to get. I was reading a deal here, an article about 2 weeks ago, and it was talking about Egypt. Egypt was trying to develop a desert wheat because they're so sick of importing. They can't support their population within their country, and they're trying to develop a desert type wheat. Whether it happens or not, I don't know, but it does tell you that in the world market, wheat is very, very important. So the basis for production in any living organism, you have to have the genetics of seed. We have to worry about the placement of the seed. Most of you do a very, very good job. You're going at 1.5 inches depth. That's really, really good. The problem with it is we treat wheat more like a broadcast crop. A lot of our air seeders, whether you're doing a boot or a broadcast span, is we're losing control of that grass crop. If you think of it in terms of corn, you need to control that seed all the way to the bottom of the trench. My family had an opportunity to go over to Europe last year, and I wish I could have went there. But they got to go through Northern Europe, and it was a school trip for the German club. And they got to see a bunch of different farming operations and how they did that. They're down to a 3.5 to 4 inch row spacing. And the reason they're at a 3.5 and 4 inch row spacing is everything you do is about harvesting sunlight and converting it into a usable food or a usable product for human consumption. So if you think about a wheat plant in a 10-inch band, and it lives, what, 60 days for uptake for nutrients? How many days until canopy is a row? You've lost available photosynthetic properties there for 2 weeks. So you've lost yield. Europeans have gone down to that 3.5 to 4 inch spacing because of that reason. They're pushing 100 bushels. Yes, their environment's a little bit different, I get that. But they're still harvesting as much sunlight as possible. So after you place it, you can go, I don't care where you get your seed. They're all good. The point of it is they work in different environments better than others. And the other point is, if you look up their AgriPro Westbred cropland, Pioneer's involved in it. Every major corn company is developing a wheat line. And we're hearing I think it's possibly in 2 years, we'll have the release of hybrid wheat for spring wheat for our area. And that's, I mean, think what the hybrid did to the sunflower crop or the corn crop over the past. It was enormous advances in yield. The university has very good stuff. Sometimes I question whether we manage the varieties that they are very well. Vollmer is a good example. Everyone complains about Volmer's protein, but do you really feed it to the protein, to the yield that it gives you? If you go back and calculate the math at 2.5 pounds for a 14 protein, and you're taking off 70 bushel wheat, and you're fertilizing it for 55, 60, and you expect it to have protein. Everyone's very good at spraying herbicides, but it does keep the plant healthy from competition and fungicide. Fungicide is, in Europe, if you watch, is minimum 3 times to produce that 100 bushel wheat. Minimum 3 passes of fungicide. It all starts with your seeding date. I got this slide from Syngenta, but it's trying to emphasize the fact that it is a cool season crop. Consequently, most of our native range here the soil that was developed here was inherently prolific for wheat grass species. I mean, if you look at all your native ranges, they were predominantly controlled by wheat grasses, so why do we struggle to push our wheat yields up higher and higher? One would say that your environment probably is more suited for wheat production than it is for maize or corn. This is some data I picked out of Ontario, and I'll explain what they did here. They took frozen ground that was thawed, and it's not going to happen every year, but what they did is they went out and seeded at night, and you get that crusting over the top where you get about a ½ inch of frost. And then they took a no-till drill, went in there, and the furrow won't even close. And they didn't worry about it. And then they compared to the 3-week time period it would take till after the frost was completely gone and normal seeding conditions that we currently go through. But if you look at what your spring wheat yields compared, and then look at your test weight goes up. Then especially when you go on to corn. You know, you're sitting at a 20 bushel increase, well, a third of the crop increase. Not that we're going to spray that, and I don't know if some of that was associated with the timing, just because of fusarium, being it was on corn ground, if it was that far out or not. But this is just there to show you how important it is to get it in. I remember, was it 2 years ago, Tim? That field up by Toma was seeded in March, because the guy said he wanted to seed it, just say he seeded some wheat in March. Kind of a raggy looking thing. And it was the best yielding crop you had in the farm, wasn't it? We can't emphasize enough the idea to get into that ground early. The other thing you're going to see is that when we talk about nutrient placement, everything you read on these 100 bushel clubs or these 100 bushel guys trying to produce 100 bushels of spring wheat is they can't front load your wheat with everything. Probably the real reason that you can't front load it at that level is because of the environment we're putting it on. Some of our soils just can't hold that much nutrient. 2 years ago, we had an opportunity to go down to a meeting and to listen to a national agronomist, and he was talking about corn production. He was actually a soil scientist was his background, but he was talking about the mentality for corn, for you to go to take a corn producer from 150 to 180 is a lot easier than to take a guy from 180 to 190. The reason is your management strategy has changed so much because the other limiting factors that come into play are totally different. It's not your NP and K, it's other things that you're dealing with. The soils, how fast they release potassium, how the phosphorus is available. You're taking a 2-pound increment on nutrient load changes everything because your limiting factors, it's like an athlete being able to go from taking a half second off of his 100-meter dash time or something like that. I mean, it's just the little things that make the difference. When you're going after that, you need to seed treat, especially if you're going to push the seeding and deep. This is out of, well, you can read where the data is from. 2.3 bushel. Now, when we walk the fields and we've seen some of this, I would say that in some cases is really light. If you go out in a non-treated check or a non-treated field, it might be in certain zones where it's not bad, but you'll find hot pockets in that field where root rot, for example, will completely nub off all the roots and you will have nothing there. And you'll come in there and wonder why you have straw that's tall and wheat head that big and still about that much. 100 bushel wheat and 15 bushel in the hopper. And that's one of the reasons that you need to treat. Insecticide is another thing that plays big time benefits. Most of the seed insecticides that you get within a seed treatments now has carrying over into the wheat aphids. They'll persist long enough so you'll get some benefit on that early season wheat aphid, cereal aphid. Because everyone says, I don't have enough water. But I probably won't even go through it because it comes out of Montana. It was under an irrigation system. The gist of it was that it takes 5 inches of rain to produce a base crop, and out there I believe they were using 20 bushel. And for every inch of moisture you get above that, you get a 7 bushel increase. And that's what they were figuring. But then you have to keep in mind that your transpiration rate and your evaporation, all that stuff changes just because of their more arid climate. So then I came back and I went through the end down here out of Carrington, and it looks like, well, we've got a 14-inch average rainfall. So if you go back, figure the math on that, how do we support some of these 80, 90 bushel wheat yields that some of you guys have taken off in some of them years? So the genetics are out there. I just don't think it's on the moisture side. I think it's a management. We have to switch our management a little bit and really pay attention to the nutrition. So when we came in, we do see this. That your 20-year trend of fertilizer is going up. And it needs to continue to go up. The big question is placement. Out from where I live, out by Gray City, there was a neighbor there that he had a soil profile done. And the soil, he wanted to know how many nutrients he could hold in the soil. He found out he can hold 100 pounds of leachable nutrients. So he's worried about nitrogen and sulfur. What kind of crop can you raise if you're going to front load it off that? You're not going to raise much. So when he started doing some top dressing and some of that other things, his yield potentials went way up, or his yields responded very well. I don't have any data on some of the stuff that we did over the years up in the Rockford area, but I had one grower that front loaded every year, and he talked himself into, he'll get a big rain event. He comes in and top dresses a little bit. Yeah, that worked. I worked out here. Should have done the whole farm. Next year he does, well, I don't know, I probably didn't give it enough because he fertilized with 55, 60 bushel. Let's do that quarter over there, okay? Well, that worked, that ran 80, their stuff ran 55. That was without a rain event. The point, it paid for them every year to do this. But I don't know, in each individual case, we don't know what your soils can hold through the whole field, let alone individual portions of the field. And we hear a lot about variable rate, but every variable rate field that we've ever done up here has always been for corn. Well, why don't we do a variable rate on wheat? It's kind of the same principle. Our nutrients that we're taking off to sustain big yields are way up there. It's not much different than corn. This is some stuff that I pulled out of Canada too. This is uptake, measuring of uptake. On 40 bushel wheat, your NP and your K, if you look across, look at the sulfur. And I don't know if you understand the sulfur role it plays within the plant, but sulfur is critical for amino acid performance. So without amino acids, we can't make protein. Without sulfur, you're not going to get high protein wheat. You're just not. But if you look down through there, got 100 bushel corn. Look at the uptake of nitrogen there. Look on the 40 bushel, and it's not directly double. There's a maintenance factor that goes into just existing. So I would say the first 25 bushel of wheat that you produce is the most inefficient per unit of N per bushel produced. It's just to exist, it takes nutrients. So if you look at that, and if you double that up, let's say we want to go to 80, that's 180, that's 120 corn. The difference you have with this, I have to get that many pounds of nitrogen into a wheat crop in half the life. It lives half as long. So how are we going to migrate it from the soil into there at that time to be able to load it all up? First of all, most of the soil that our spring wheat goes on in our area is not the best soil. I know it can't hold it. So we have to top dress on some of them areas. The other thing that works very nice is, I like it because it's easier. We can do it at 3-leaf wheat, and we can minimize the risk of the environment, but we can also minimize the economic risk. If there is no moisture out there, if we're having a year where we're only going to possibly, it doesn't look like a wheat year, okay? The grower then can look at it and say, I don't want to put that much out there because it's just not going to pay you back. It's a way to manage your money, your operating, your line of credit, or your cash, or whatever you have. So at Winfield, we do tissue samples, and this is what all across North Dakota. This is compiled from 2010 through 2014. And if you pay attention to the sulfur, if you think back, in 2010 we've seen a lot of sulfur deficiency within our wheat. One, it's easy to put it on. We address that. Most of our growers address that. By the way, when you look at the tissue samples, if you're wondering where these samples were compiled from, these aren't hillbillies. These are usually your progressive farmers. But look what you're doing. How many deficiencies do we have in chloride, in zinc, and in copper? Copper, by the way, shows up deficient in soybeans a lot too. But the copper deal is probably a 2 to 3 pound inclusion rate of copper into your starter fertilizer, and that would offset that. But I wouldn't even worry. Don't even worry about this until you get this stuff right. This is actually an order that they call the order of hierarchy. That's the order that they consider they're needed in. Nitrogen being the most, phosphorus, potassium, the big three. Calcium, which is, this one kind of surprises me with our soils. We should be releasing, North Dakota soils are inherently high in calcium, so we shouldn't have this, something else is going on where they're getting a tie-up, whether with, might be with molybdenum or whatever. I don't know what's going on there. But when you get down here, this sulfur thing, we addressed that pretty hard, and it was easy to fix sulfur. But when you go down to boron, that one is very typically, boron is very typically, if you look at alfalfa production, very, very typical on coarse aggregate soil. Your gravelly, sandier soil, and that seems to be where the migration of the wheat market has moved. Then zinc, of course, and chloride. Chloride is interesting how you're going to get chloride to the plant. Most of the time you'll see your potassium soil tests are usually 2, 180, 300 parts per million. Should say that you should have enough potassium to support the wheat crop. Sometimes our benefit out of potash, which is potassium chloride, is coming on the chloride side. But also, to measure the potassium load, why we're still shooting at a third of our field are still deficient in potassium is a measure of how fast that soil can release that potassium to that crop. And it changes by your soils, and then we're condensed on the time period for the amount of nutrients, the amount of pounds we need to get up. You just probably can't release it fast enough to support that many bushels. That's kind of slides that we see as agronomists from across. We see not only NDSU stuff, we see University of Minnesota, Nebraska, Lincoln, Canadian data, Montana data, and quite honestly, there's some conflicting data out there. That doesn't mean it's not right, it just means the environment that the study was held in might not have been the same, for example. If there's if anybody has any questions or thoughts on what it would take to produce 100 bushel of wheat, I don't even know if it's doable here on every acre. I don't know if it is. But your yield monitors show that it is. Can I fix some of them spots? Probably not. There's might be your hindering deal on a field, and it might drive that whole field average down below 100. No matter what you do to it, until you fix the salt problem, you're not going to change it. Although, are you over fertilizing sulfur in one area, or over fertilizing nitrogen in one area, and under fertilizing phosphorus or potassium? You know, you can put all the nitrogen and sulfur on you want. If you have a potassium deficiency, it's not going to get to where it needs to go. Your potassium delivers. It's like your vehicle or your semi truck in the plant. It carries the nutrients to where they need to be. The other thing that you really got to concentrate on is flag leaf protection. Critical. Flag leaf is at last stages. That's where protein is made for your wheat kernel, and that's where all your photosynthesis, basically 80% of your photosynthesis that happens at the end, is all through the flag leaf. If you choose your variety correctly and look for a scab-tolerant variety year in and year out, you would be better off spraying a fungicide to protect the flag leaf than you would be if that's the only fungicide application you made. The problem with it is its timing and cost. Some of our better wheat producers in the north, they will spray 3 times, twice for sure. Third time depends on your forecast model, on the scab. But they will spray. This is just what they do. They'll spray a tilt propiconazole on at their herbicide pass, and they'll come back at flag leaf and they'll spray their headline or their stroke of your choice, whatever. And then they'll watch a forecast model to see if they need to spray for head scab. And usually when they spray for head scab, it becomes more of a insurance policy because they have a good crop out there, they're going to spray it. I mean, that factors into some of your decisions too. They don't want to risk losing that crop. We have changed some of our starter guidelines on a couple guys just because of their soil types are really light. So we have put down, we'll run up to the 18 pounds of N. These are no-till guys. That's why their soil types are suspect to leaching. But we have run 18 pounds of N down as a starter in the form of ammonium sulfate. So we're delivering the sulfur, their 1152, or their MAP-S, and their potassium, or their potash, down as a starter up front. So then we'll turn around and we'll come back and we'll do a nitrogen application over the top. The only reason we're doing a lot of this is that a lot of the soil just can't hold. They'll get the rainfall, they just can't hold the nutrients.